I had walked only a few steps before I was forced to stop. Blocking my path was a tiny woman bent under the weight of the hump on her back. I knew her at once, though we hadn't met. Manthara. She was dressed in a gaudy red silk far above her station and wore around her neck a double string of luscious pearls. They looked familiar, and after a moment, I realized that KKE had been wearing them when I saw her last. What did KKE's spy want with me? Greetings, princess, and congratulations, Manthara said. She gave me a bow that seemed exaggerated, almost a caricature. But perhaps I was imagining this because the hunchback made me uncomfortable. I tried to offer her a gracious smile. Her deformity and the way people looked at her because of it with disgust or fear was not her fault. I bring you a message from Dashrath, Manthara said. I was surprised by the familiar way in which she said the king's name. It was disrespectful for a servant, no matter how favored, to do so. Manthara continued. You are to present yourself at Queen Kaikeyi's chambers, where he spent the night. Ram too has been summoned there. Come with me. The disturbing dream I had had last night flickered in my mind. I didn't want to follow Manthara. I didn't trust her. It will make us late for the ceremony, I protested. Don't worry, you will have plenty of time, Manthara said. The smile on her face was more like a smirk. Lurching from side to side, she moved with unexpected rapidity along a narrow veranda I hadn't noticed earlier. Ram's coronation is not about to happen just yet. From the veranda, which ran along the edge of the palace, we could see the bordering street. The music was loud there. Men and women danced on the street, strewing flower petals. A ceremonial gate decorated with bright fabrics and colored flags had been erected. I guessed that Ram and I were supposed to begin a chariot procession from there. Manthara stopped for a moment, rising on her toes to observe the festivities. Ah, the stupid masses. They will soon be dancing to a different tune. Truly, ignorance is bliss. Is it not? Her words sent a chill through me. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I knew that was exactly what she wanted me to do. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I pressed my lips together and followed her in silence. The reason for this detour in our plans would become clear in a few minutes. Probably, Kaikeyi wanted to give us a wedding gift, forcing us to come to her chamber, for it was her way of asserting her power, especially as she knew that her importance would diminish once Kaushalya became queen mother. But my dream kept coming back to me. Dashrath on his knees, that haunting look of horror and hopelessness on his face. Manthara ushered me into a great hall. I hadn't been here before. Kaikeyi had received me in a smaller room the last time. This space was grand and formal. Kaikeyi had decorated it as though it were a royal court with floors of polished, intricately designed stone and massive carved furniture. But today it appeared strangely dim in spite of the gleaming floors and walls and the huge windows which opened onto the glorious day outside, echoing with celebration. Dashrath sat on the dais on a golden throne. I bowed to him, but he seemed not to see me. I was shocked that how old he looked. The hair clumped around his face was grayer than before. An unkempt stubble dotted his cheeks, and his eyes were bleary and unfocused. In one night, he seemed to have aged decades. Had he fallen suddenly ill? Suffered an attack of some kind? Father, I called, hurrying towards him, but Kaikeyi moved with agility, inserting herself between us. In contrast to the king, she appeared young and invigorated, more beautiful than ever. Her face shone, and she wore a heavy gold saree and a great amount of jewelry. Sit, she said with a dazzling smile, leading me to a low chair, clearly inappropriate for the queen to be. Ram should be here any moment, and then we will begin. Manthara, give Sita something to drink. I began a polite refusal, wishing only to finish whatever formalities Kaikeyi had planned and leave quickly. Vasishta had warned us not to be late. As at my wedding, the auspicious moment today was a short one. He didn't want us to miss it. But Manthara had already thrust a cold silver glass filled with pomegranate juice into my hand. Not wishing to appear rude, I took a reluctant sip of the blood red liquid. Then Ram was in the room. His presence made me feel better. Now that he had arrived, he would take charge. Whatever was wrong would be set right. I rose smiling. But he didn't even see me. His worried eyes were focused on Dashrath. I came as soon as I received your summons, sir. What is wrong? Dashrath said nothing, but a spasm passed over his face and tears sprang to his eyes. He held out his trembling hands, and Ram knelt in front of him and clasped them tightly. Kaikeyi, is my father ill? I know you are a gifted healer and you must be taking good care of him. But maybe we should send for. The king's lips moved, though for a moment he was unable to form words. Finally, he said, his voice low and harsh, Healer, she is the cause of all my ills, Rakshasi. She will be the cause of my death as well. I curse the day I married her. What is the problem? Ram asked, his voice reflecting the shock that we both felt. No matter what it is, I promise that I will help you take care of it. But the king hung his head as though in shame. He seemed to have receded into an inner world where none of us were present. Instead, it was Kaikeyi who spoke. Indeed, Ram, you alone can help Dashrath. Years ago, I saved his life twice, and he promised me two boons. Today, I have claimed them, but they can only be fulfilled by you. The men of the house of Raghu have always prided themselves on keeping their word. Now, their honor lies in your hands. Ram disengaged himself from his father gently and stood tall. I could see he was about to speak. His face had taken on a noble, detached look that frightened me. I rushed over to him and grabbed his arm. According to palace protocol, I should have remained silent. But I had a bad feeling about all this. Don't make any promise until you know what she wants, I whispered fiercely. He laid his hand over mine, but he didn't look at me. Instead, he spoke to Kaikeyi. You need not bring up the reputation of the Raghuvamsha, Kaikeyi, in order to gain your wish. He said, his tone mildly reproving. I will do anything I can to help my father keep his word. For a moment, Kaikeyi hesitated. Was it shame that flitted across her face? She glanced at Manthara as though gathering her resolve. These are the two boons. One, that my son Bharat be made king of Koshala instead of you. That is his right. Because you might not know this, and your father has conveniently forgotten it. But when we were married, Dashrath promised my father that my son would sit on the throne of Ayodhya. And here is the second boon, that you be banished to the forest for 14 years. Blood roared in my ears so loudly, I was sure I had heard wrong. Kaikeyi loved Ram. I had seen genuine fondness fill her face when she talked to him. Now, overnight, she was ready to wrest his kingdom away from him and throw him into darkness and danger. How can you do this? I cried, my fury making me forget all the lessons in caution that my mother had taught me. It is wrong in every way. We all know that Ram would be a better king than Bharat. He has been trained for it his whole life, while Bharat is always away in Kekeya. He has rarely attended court sessions. Has he put down uprisings like Ram? Or if he hasn't, Kaikeyi interrupted coldly. It is because his father never gave him the opportunity. Ram's hand tightened around my wrist, his grasp like iron. I knew I would have a bruise later, but that was the least of my concerns. Stand up against this huge injustice, I wanted to say, but he shook his head, indicating he didn't want me to speak. I obeyed, but in my mind, I begged him, protest. If nothing else, remind your father of his kingly duty to the people of Ayodhya. But my husband didn't do that. Instead, without hesitation, he said, "It will be as you wish." He bowed formally to Kaikeyi, his face impassive. Only I saw the hurt that flickered for a moment in his eyes. Kaikeyi smiled her triumph. If love can change so quickly into hate, I thought, looking at her face, what are we to depend on? Ram and I made our way to Kaushalya's quarters. So many emotions swirled inside me. I could hardly breathe. But topmost was outrage. Ram and I had never fought, but I was ready for it now. I said, "I can't believe that you agreed to Kaikeyi's unfair demands without standing up to her. It would be a different matter if your father king asked you to step down, but he clearly doesn't want that, and for good reason. He knows you are the only one who can hold Kaushal together after he has gone." Ram looked at me. I could see the stress on his face. And that is what I am doing. Apart from honoring my father's promise, which is my duty as his son, I want Kaushal to have peace. If I protested, strife would erupt all over the kingdom. Kaikeyi is powerful. She has her own faction here, her own gods. Riots could occur, maybe even civil war. Maybe worse, if she calls upon her brother to come and join her with his powerful Kaikeyi army. I can't be the cause of so much death and destruction. But I began hotly. He put me a gentle arm around me. "I know this is a shock to you, dearest one. I need you to be strong now and calm. I need your support, my wife." I looked into his eyes and saw that beneath all the resolve, he too was worried. He too didn't know how things would turn out. He too was reeling at this betrayal. I pushed away my own sorrows and fears. Later, I said to them, "I will deal with you later." My duty was clear, and it was an easier one than Ram's. It consisted only of one thing: helping Ram get through this challenge. "Whatever you decide," I said to him, "I will support you. Whatever comes to you as a result of your decision, we will handle it together. Hand in hand, we went to break the news to Kaushalya. Kaushalya's quarters were fragrant with incense and music and filled with women, her own companions, as well as many of the minor queens who had come to pay their respects now that they thought she was about to be elevated to queen motherhood. They were singing good luck songs and eating sweetmeats, but they broke off in shock when we entered, closely followed by attendants carrying the stricken king on a pallet. The gold bowl of kumkum, with which Kaushalya was about to mark our foreheads, fell from her hand, leaving an ugly red splotch on her saree. She too would have fallen if Ram hadn't caught her. In a few words, he explained to her and to Lakshman and Urmila, who were waiting to accompany us to the coronation hall, what Kekeyi had asked for and what he had agreed to. Urmila was too stunned to move or speak, but Lakshman's face grew black with fury. What nonsense is this, brother? He cried in a voice so terrible that all except Ram trembled. Why should you give up your right to the throne just because in his old days our father has lost his senses and become a puppet in our stepmother's hands? How could he ever consider her ridiculous demands? I have lost all respect for him. You are the eldest and the best among us brothers. You are my king. Say the word, and I will single handedly capture Bharat and drag him in chains to your feet. Whosoever tries to stop me, be it foot soldier or mighty warrior or even Shatrughna, with whom I shared my mother's womb, I will kill them all. I was looking at another of love's many faces. It made us ready to wreak havoc even on people we cared for in order to protect those whom we cherished more. Wasn't it the same force that impelled Kaikeyi to turn on Ram in order to guard her own son's interest? Wasn't it the same force that led Manthara, for the hunchback I suspected was the orchestrator of this entire disaster, to whisper directives to Kaikeyi, whom she still saw as the innocent child to whom she had devoted her entire misshapen life? I was learning more about the twisted paths along which love swept us humans along than I had ever expected or wanted. Looking at the terrible shining in Lakshmana's face, I hoped that I would never find myself standing in the path of such a ruthless jewel. Silence, brother, Ram said, and although he spoke in a soft voice, there was steel underneath. Never speak ill of our father. He has achieved more in his lifetime than we will ever know, and as you can see, he is already suffering. Neither should you be angry with Bharat, who is the most blameless of all. He doesn't care for kingship, you know that. I suspect he will be deeply distressed when he learns what has happened here. Looking unconvinced, Lakshman lowered his head like a bull about to charge. He would better be, I heard him mutter. Why even blame my father for what has transpired? Ram continued. Hasn't our teacher Vasishta taught us that many strands of karma must come together for an upheaval like this to occur? Yours, mine, the kingdoms, perhaps the entire earths. The wise man accepts it calmly. Who knows why I am going into the forest and whom I will meet there? How can you be so philosophical at this time? Lakshman shouted. That is what Kaikeyi is counting on. Your overdeveloped sense of decency. You need to fight her. All you have ever wanted since we were children is to rule Ayodhya and do it well. How can you let her take that away from you? Forget about yourself, but don't you care about our citizens who are waiting? No, longing for you to become their king? Brother, please, Ram said. I could see in his eyes the pain of having all his dreams crashing around him. I don't have time to discuss this right now. All I can say is, don't make things more difficult for me. At that, Lakshman bowed his head and said no more. Now, Kaushalya came forward, weeping, and clasped Ram's hands. Why are you scolding Lakshman? He only speaks out of loyalty to you. And he is right. Why should you be banished like a common criminal? What harm have you ever done? Even if you give the throne to Bharat out of some misguided sense of duty, you must not go to the forest. How can you possibly survive there for 14 years among all those wild beasts and rakshasas and black magic? No doubt that is exactly what that witch Kaikeyi is counting on. She took a deep breath and continued. If you don't want to remain in this palace, that is fine. I don't want to stay here either, not after all this. Let us go, you and I and Sita, to a little corner of Kaushal far away from Ayodhya. We will live in a mud hut if need be, or we could go to Mithila. I am sure Janak would gladly take us in. There at least you will be safe. There at least I will see you each day. No, don't refuse me so quickly. As your mother, am I not your elder too? Isn't my request worth something? Don't you have a duty towards me, just as you do towards Dashrath? Ram held his mother close. I could see how much it hurt him to refuse her, but his voice was firm. Be calm and draw upon the strength and wisdom that I know you possess. As my dearly loved mother, you must help me now. Help me follow the path of right, which, as you yourself taught me, isn't always easy. You know that my first duty must be to my father because he is also my king. He is your king too. That is why you need to put aside your own sorrow and comfort him after I am gone. Such was the power of his voice that Kaushalya stopped weeping. Ah, what a king you would have made, my Ram. And now, instead, he would struggle in the forest and probably perish there. Kaushalya was right. Who could last alone in the wilderness for 14 years? A deep sorrow welled up in me at the waist. As for me, Ram added, but this time his voice had changed and his eyes were unfocused, as though he were seeing things beyond mortal vision. Whatever befalls me in the forest, know that to be my destiny. I embrace it. Well, you will not be embracing it alone, Lakshman cried. I am going to the forest with you. And don't you try to tell me that it is my duty to stay here. My duty is to follow you. I have been doing that ever since I learned to crawl. You will need someone to take care of you in the forest, to watch your back, to protect you when you rest. And I will do that, or die trying it. His words had pulled Ram out of his trance. Very well, brother, he said. I confess I will be a lot happier in the forest if I have you for company. And he smiled his first smile since our lives were turned upside down. Watching that sweet smile that wasn't meant for me, I was stung by jealousy. Some of the jealousy was of the bond between the brothers, but mostly it was jealousy of the freedom given to men to go wherever they wanted in the wide world. I allowed some of the outrage I had pushed down to come back up. You are so concerned about everyone else, I said silently to Ram. Your father, your mother, Lakshman, even the absent Bharat. But what about me? Have you forgotten about me? Of course he hadn't. I knew that. He was waiting until we were alone. I had a good idea about what he planned to ask me then. Well, it was not going to work. I would make sure of that by fighting him with everything in my arsenal. But I would fight smart, the way my mother had taught me. Help me, goddess, I cried silently. Because my goal is not to win over Ram, but to win him over. What will happen to us now, sister? A small voice said. Cold fingers worked their way into mine. I looked at Urmila, her face pale and frightened. I'm not going to give up so easily, I said, and neither should you. Thanks for listening.